without also looking at two Catholics plus Our Lady. Okay. All right. So this picture is a picture of an altar cross. All right. So that is an altar cross. So in 1921, a man went into kind of history, like Mexico in the 1920s. Highly sort of Masonic government, really hated the church. Sort of after this is the Crusaders movement, where this revolution happens. But anyway, so he goes into the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe and decides he's going to lay some roses at the foot of the tilma, and we'll talk more about all that later. And so he goes up to the altar and he lays his roses, and then he walks off, and inside the roses are literally a ton of dynamite, and it blows up, right? And that's what happens to the altar cross, which is sitting in front of the tilma, which is behind glass. Nothing happens to the tilma, right? A mile away, windows are breaking in houses. Nothing happens to the tilma, right? And so he, obviously something that was planned. There's all these government agents in the basilica to keep him from getting torn apart by the Catholics that were there. They arrest him. He goes before the judge, and the judge says, "Well, this is going to end up helping the church anyway. You're free to go." So anyway, the point is that Our Lady of Guadalupe, and especially the tilma and the image, which we'll talk a lot about today. It's something that science has spent a lot of time studying, and the more it studies it, the cooler it gets, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But we've talked about in the past about like motives of credibility, right? Like reasons to believe that the church really is what it says it is, and this is one of them. Like we should all know the story of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and not just because it's really cool and it's really neat how all these miraculous things happen, but also because I think it's a message for us, especially in America, and it's a message in which I don't think it's done yet, and we'll talk a little bit about at the end about how that all sort of fits together. All right, so we've talked about this before, but I want to sort of go back over it for a second about the importance of history as Catholics, understanding history, right? Because our faith is incarnational. Christ steps into time. Things happen historically, and God works everything out in history. And so this is not to like sort of over-spiritualize everything, but it is to begin to see that God is at work in the world. He's not somewhere else. His attention is nowhere else but here. And so what I want to do for the first maybe 10 minutes or so is just sort of set up this sort of proper understanding of history, because without it, we can't then go and talk about Columbus and Cortes, okay, and then lead up to Our Lady of Guadalupe. So, how many of you know who Christopher Dawson is? All right, so Christopher Dawson is was a Catholic historian who sort of understood what I just said, who understood that to look at history is to look at God in action. And so, if you're going to read history books, he's one of the guys you want to read. Warren Carroll is another one who we'll talk about. He's the founder of Christian Union College, and there's others. So, now think about this for a second, right? So, the way we're typically taught history, if at all, is just to begin with facts about things, right? Like 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Full stop, right? But really, that's not what someone who studies history does, right? There's always an interpretation to the way the story is told, right? And so understanding the context in which things happen helps us then see the bigger picture and to see sort of how God is working. Right, so here's what Dawson says. Christianity can never ignore history because the Christian revelation is essentially historical and the truths of faith are inseparably connected with historical events. The sacred scriptures of our religion are not made up of expositions of metaphysical doctrines like the Vendetta. They form a sacred history, the record of God's dealings with the human race from the creation of man to the creation of the church. Okay? So he's saying, okay, initially we go into Scripture, especially the Old Testament, it's a history book. Right? It's a history book, true history, and the reason why it's true history is it has events, but then it puts God's interpretation of the events. In other words, the true meaning of the events, right? That's exactly what happens. at all of those, every one of those events, right? If you go back in history and look at something like the flood, right, you can find that like throughout ancient literature. But only the Old Testament has what the flood actually meant, all right? And so that's what we have to begin to then see, how God providentially acts and what the meaning of different events in history are. Yes, Con?
So especially Old Testament, let's say, made before kind of Abraham, normally gets... there are questions raised about his historicity. Historicity?
Yes.
So, how do we interpret that, and does it matter?
So I think we've talked about this before, but so I would say when you read Scripture, unless you have a good reason to not take it literally and not take it historical, then you should. So there's no reason I mean, again, some of those things are prehistoric, which, as the name suggests, like, you kind of don't know if they actually happened or not. And no reason why. I mean, Moses is talking about a lot of things he didn't see, right? So they're revealed to him. But there's no reason to, unless you have a good reason to interpret it another way, then you assume that they are historically accurate. Yes?
Do you have any recommended sources for determining that about different books?
The Church Fathers, Augustine, City of God. So really kind of cool. So Augustine and City of God, so books like 14 to 19. He literally goes through sacred scripture and ties all of the Old Testament together historically. He gets like in the nitty gritty details. He's like, okay, how did this guy live 720 years? Like all those sort of things, and he works it out. And he shows that he doesn't tie in, but he ties it into other historical sort of documents that are around in his time. He's the one who he is the one who does Catholic history correctly, and then everyone else is just sort of a footnote to what he's doing. But yeah, if you want to sort of understand Old Testament history, you can't get any better than those 4 or 5 books of the City of God. All right, so the point is, right, that the essence of history is not just the facts, but the meaning of those facts, right? And that's what we're always trying to assign. And so if we're not careful, somebody else will assign those meanings to it, right? How many of you guys, just be honest, how many of you guys think Christopher Columbus was a bad guy?
Certainly teach that in school.
I mean, it's okay to say yes,
I think he's in the middle.
Okay.
Not horrible, but I wouldn't call him a great guy either.
Okay, how about Cortes? I'm just curious. How many are in the Cortes fan club? Hernan Cortes, not the other, not the female Cortes.
What? Did you say that like him?
Yeah, that are, that think he was a good guy. I think he did something good.
Yeah, something good.
Okay. All right. So we'll see what you guys think at the end. All right. So anyway, the point is that history can be used as a weapon too, right? So people can change the way you think about things, and the church almost always is attacked that way, right? Inquisition, the Crusades, you name it, right? The church is attacked, and so it's sort of we're sort of obligated to learn our history and not whitewash it. I mean, we're going to talk about Columbus and Cortes, and we're not going to whitewash it, but we are going to see sort of what their motivation was, what they set out to do, what they actually did, and so forth. So. Casey, to answer another question, John Henry Newman is also another one that you would read for history. So here's John Henry Newman. He's talking about history being taught in the university. And he's saying essentially what I just said. So pass away with the ancient voices of religion and learning, that they are silenced only to revive more gloriously and perfect elsewhere. Hitherto they came from separate sources and performed separate works. Each leaves an heir and successor in the West, and that heir and successor is one and the same. The grace stored in Jerusalem and the gifts which radiate from Athens are made over and concentrated in Rome. Okay, so he's talking about the church. This is true as a matter of history. Rome has inherited both sacred and profane learning. She has perpetuated and dispensed the traditions of Moses and David in the supernatural order, and of Homer and Aristotle in the natural. To separate those distinct teachings, human and divine, which meet in Rome, is to retrograde. It is to rebuild the Jewish temple and to plant anew the groves of academia. All right. So his point is 2 things. the first thing is, what happens if you don't know your history?
Doomed to repeat.
Well, yeah, if you believe you're doomed to repeat it, that might be true. You guys ever seen The Bourne Identity? What's wrong with that guy?
Yeah, yeah.
He doesn't know his history, right? Like, he has no idea where he's coming from. So what is he? He's lost, right? He has no idea where he came from. And because he has no idea where he came from, he has no idea where he's going. All right? So Henry Ford, who is like the... I'm going all over the place here. Who is like sort of... if you've read Brave New World, he's like the hero of... they call him our Ford. But he said that all history is bunk. The only history that matters is the history that I'm writing. Okay, and his point is that the history doesn't matter; it's what we're doing right now. Okay, and that sort of is the sort of prevailing mentality, right? History becomes social studies, or whatever, or nothing at all. So, what I want to do today is for us to sort of own our history, like as American Catholics, and it'll have its, it'll have its little ugly pieces, and it has this really glorious piece when Our Lady appears. All right. So what we can't do though is this is both sort of liberal and Marxist in a certain way, in that history is not all conflict. Okay, that's the other sort of interpretation that we always hear. Like, history is just this conflict where people are just trying to strive for more and more freedom. Right? It's not that either. History is God working out man's salvation in the flesh. All right. Okay. All right. So that's sort of our motivation. So let's sort of get down to the business here a little bit. All right. So here's my question for you. What set the Spanish, Portuguese, and French explorers apart from the English and Dutch explorers of the New World?
They're Catholic.
Okay, so they're Catholic. All right, but how did that matter, though?
They came to evangelize, and I mean, at least with the English were the religious dissidents that were escaping to the...
Yeah, say that again, because that's the point, right? What did the Catholic explorers come to do? Evangelize, right? How do we know that?
They have a long history, at least for the Spanish. Like, they have a long history of, like, sending missionaries, especially out of, like, the California and the western regions.
Yeah.
You look at the desert history of the cities in South America.
I thought I remember being in St. Augustine, and there was like a story like, oh, it might have even been Christopher Columbus or somebody important and shown up, and they like planted a giant cross.
Yeah, I think it's
Constantine
was the one who showed
and then
up.
like celebrated a mass like on shore or something like that. You know? It's
Yeah.
like,
So the minute that they get there, they're setting up a mass for sure. But so, have you ever really thought about that for like that? Sort of, if you go to like Virginia, New England, they're here for material wealth. The Indians are just a nuisance, right? Now, the Spanish, when they get to Mexico, some of them aren't any better, right? But in principle, they're here to make converts, all right? Which ought to sort of wake us up a little bit to what our role is too, all right? All right, so I want us to sort of reframe that a little bit. Because so sort of the modern ear, the idea that you would do something for religious reasons, and those could be your primary reasons, is totally like crazy, right? It's like there's nothing worse than being like a fundamentalist, right? Who does everything for religion, right? But these men, that's exactly what they were doing, all right? So let's talk a little bit about. We'll start with Columbus, all right? Some of you guys know that Pope Leo XIII wrote an encyclical about Christopher Columbus. Now, Pope Leo XIII wrote an encyclical pretty much about everything. He had like 50 of them, I think, his 30-something years, or maybe even more. I mean, I think every year he came out with one on the Rosary. So he has a lot. But I want us to begin to think a little bit about what he says about Columbus. But there is, besides another reason, a unique one, why we consider that this immortal achievement should be recalled by us with memorial words. He's talking about Columbus coming to America. For Columbus is ours. He's like owning him. He's Catholic. Since if a little consideration be given to the particular reason of his design in exploring the Mare Tenebrosum, and also I think that's wide sea, I think is what that means. And also the manner in which he endeavored to execute the design, it is indubitable that the Catholic faith was the strongest motive for the inception and prosecution of the design, so that for this reason, also the whole human race owes not a little to the Church. So this idea of one of the reasons why we sort of struggled with, is he a good guy or not? Right? He's not a saint, right? But is he a hero? You understand, like, the difference, right? Like all saints are heroes, right? But not all heroes are saints. Like, is this someone that we should actually look up to? Andrew looks a little...
No.
He seemed to exemplify a lot of the moral failings and the virtuous life.
I mean, I would say yes, because like you think about the desire to know the created world made by God and explore it, and then just from a historical perspective, like in the modern era, we have lumped hundreds of years of evil and violence onto Columbus, which most of it is not on him.
Okay, so well, we're going to unpack that in a
I
second.
mean, that's, no, I mean, this is a major move, though, to get on the boat and go out there with the intention of, like, colonizing, you know, those people that had to be
Okay, so
pretty difficult.
What are ultimately, yes, Connor?
So, but now, correct me if my history is wrong, but like Columbus didn't intend to run into America. So it wasn't like he said, I'm going to go evangelize the New World. Can you give me some money so I can go do that?
Yes.
I'm going to go find, at least, correct me if I'm wrong, he was trying to find a trade route to Asia. Right?
Yeah, so he keeps going back. All right, so let's back up just a little bit. Why is he trying to find a trade route to Asia? Why is he going left to go right? Like, why is he doing that?
Because he miscalculated the diameter of the world.
To help fight the Salic era invasion of Europe.
Yeah, so why can't you just go across the land?
That takes a really long time.
Well, 'cause
Well, it takes a lot less time than sailing there.
they would get attacked by the.
Yeah, they'd never make it.
Yeah.
Right? They'd never make it because the Muslims would get them. Right? So Columbus decides, okay, here's what we'll do. And this is where the evangelization, he's like, we'll go and we'll get rich, and we'll hire crusaders, and we'll take back the Holy Land. And in the meantime, we'll convert all the people in the east, and we'll squeeze them. All right? So this is like a warrior spirit. Okay, this is not like soft Catholicism, right? It's like, okay, you know, evil is out there. I have to do something about it. Here's what I think I can do, right? And again, we begin to see, like, okay, what is the name Christopher? Everyone know what Saint Christopher? Christ bearer, right? Okay, so he, again, living in an age where, like, they didn't celebrate their birthdays, they celebrated their saint days, right? So they would identify with their patron saint. And he saw himself very much as the Christ bearer who would go out and carry Christ across the water, like, to his destination, like literally set out to the deep and bring Christ to other people. All right, that's ultimately what his motives are. All right, now he's got people who are supporting him monetarily. He has monetary goals and all of those things. He wants wealth. He wants all those things. But the point is, there's nothing wrong with those things. He put first things first. All right, and then second things are fine. You know. Second things are fine when you keep them within. And so back to sort of, he did some questionable things. He only did questionable things when he put second things first. All right? Only when he put second things first did he do questionable things. All right? When the first things were first, he was golden. It's when, you know, the other stuff got in the way. So he's very human, right? But we can't sort of take away the nobility of his motivation. All right, so how do we know it's his motivation? So Samuel Eliot Morison was a historian who in 1941 decided he was going to take all of 4 of Columbus's voyages and then write a history about him. So he literally sailed everywhere that Columbus went, in ships very similar. And so and then he wrote a 2-volume history on it. He is the book, and just the amount of sort of information he has in it, it's pretty awesome. He has stuff from Columbus's journal. So here's what he says about Columbus. Always with God, though, in that his biographers are right. For God is with men who for a good cause put their trust in him. Men may doubt this, but there can be no doubt that the faith of Columbus was genuine and sincere, and that his frequent communion with forces unseen was a vital element in his achievement. It gave him confidence in his destiny, assurance that his performance would be equal to the performance of his name. Again, he sees it like nomen est omen, right? His name is his destiny. This conviction that God destined him to be an instrument for spreading the faith was far more potent than the desire to win glory, wealth, and worldly honors, to which he was certainly far from indifferent. Right? So that's a fair assessment of Christopher Columbus. Right? So he sets out, what does Columbus himself say? All right. So this is when he first encounters some natives on the island of Hispaniola, and he sends this journal entry back to the Queen. All right. So how many of you know about Queen Isabella? So Queen Isabella was a Catholic monarch. So little sort of history, right? So Spain is under Muslim control for about 700 years, right? And right before Columbus comes along, Isabella and Ferdinand lead the charge to finally get the Muslims out of the Iberian Peninsula, right? So immediately we see that the Spaniards have a crusading spirit, right? But Isabella, a lot of people think she should be a saint, was a strong queen, but a holy woman. Okay, her goal in all of this was whatever God wanted. So he writes. So Columbus, in his journal, which he would hand over to the queen when he returned, he tells the king and queen this. He says, "They are people very guileless and unwarlike, all naked, men and women, as their mothers bore them. It is true that the women wear merely a piece of cotton big enough to cover their genitals, but no more. And they are very handsome, not very black, less so than the Canary Islanders. I maintain, most serene princess, that if they had access to devout persons knowing the language, they would all turn Christian. And so I hope in our Lord that your highnesses will do something about it, with much care, in order to turn to the church so numerous a people, and to convert them, as you have destroyed those who would not confess the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost." So he's saying that he wants her to tenaciously convert them, just like she did when she routed the Muslims out of Spain. Okay. So his goal is to make converts. All right, let's talk a little bit about the human side. And then we can fill in, if you guys want to talk about it, we can fill in some of the blanks if we need to. All right, so all total, Columbus makes four journeys. The first one he goes, and it's just like a scouting mission, basically. One of the ships, the Santa Maria, is a great Marian devotion, runs aground, and they can't get all the people back on the other two ships, and so they leave behind about 20 to 25 men who are lost by the time they come back. Yes, kids?
Someone was telling me the full name of the Santa Maria. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so they gave ships nicknames. So Santa Maria is its nickname, just like Nina and Pinta. Usually whoever owned the ship named it after someone.
Someone was telling me that it was like Santa Maria something, something, something. Like it was a longer name, and I didn't know that.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I've seen longer names for it, but I don't remember them connecting to Mary.
Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception.
It could have been.
Which
It
was
could
a
have been.
really interesting point about the fact that it's a longer, devotion.
Yes. Then, yes, come on.
So Santa Maria is Holy Mary. Nina is child, correct? Or what do the other two ship names mean?
Yeah, the other two were just. So he didn't own the ships. So the other two were named. So the Santa Maria is the flagship. The other two were named by whoever the nicknames were. He didn't give those nicknames to it. So anyway, so he's on the Nina, or the Nina, and the Santa Maria runs aground. They leave some men behind. So he takes the four trips total, back and forth. One time he comes back in chains. So Columbus was not an administrator. And not really, he was a great seaman, a great admiral. But really, when he was pressured by other people, would often sort of capitulate. So he just wanted to explore. So he was governor of an island. He would leave someone in charge so he could go look and explore some more. He'd come back and they'll have enslaved the natives, and he just won't do anything about it. And so there's obviously character flaws there, right? Like knowing that. So a couple of things. So what's very clear though is that the Pope and the Queen are both 100% against slavery. Now, you can imagine in the 15th century how hard it is for the Queen or the King to decree something and it get 4,000 miles away and people actually following it, first of all. Second of all, the people who tended to go there were not of the highest moral character. Let's just put it that way, including the people on the ship with Columbus. So you sort of have that going on, right? And we're going to talk more about that when we come back to when Our Lady appears in Mexico. A couple other things. So nobody stole the land, right? These were nomadic peoples who were going back and forth. They would stay in one area and then move. They didn't understand property the way that Europeans or even we do today. So that's one of those things that sort of just, okay, they didn't steal the land, right? Did they treat them well? No. But some of them did, right? So a couple of things. The minute someone became a Christian, they could not be enslaved. So you could see why people who were there would later sort of chase some of the missionaries out. The other thing, too, is even Columbus encountered some really horrible things, right? So there's a tribe in one of the there's these two tribes on Hispaniola, the Arawaks and the Caribs, and the Caribs are slaughtering the Arawaks, and they're cannibalizing, all those things. And so Columbus goes in and wipes out the Caribs. Again, this is what happens at the time. Sometimes evil has to fall under the sword, right? All right, so that's sort of like the dark part of his personality, or the dark part of what he did. It wasn't perfect, right? Just as, any time that missionaries go off, things don't always work the way they work, right? So it can't be. There's certain things that can't be whitewashed, but nevertheless, the nobility of what he wanted to do, the zeal for Christ, all of those things are things that we should sort of look up to, right? And then, of course, there's always the question of, okay, so they come back, right, on the first trip. And there's the question of what God's plan is in all this, right? So they're on their way back, and they get into this winter storm in February. Horrible. The men are pretty much thinking they're lost. And so Columbus decides, well, we will make a promise to Our Lady that we will visit one of her shrines if she gets us through this. And so they draw short straws, and he gets the short straw, and he has to make a pilgrimage to a shrine in Spain called Our Lady of Guadalupe. Okay. So he has this great Marian devotion, and on his sort of way back, he makes this promise that he will go to the shrine for an act of thanksgiving to Our Lady for getting him through. And so this other Our Lady of Guadalupe is a shrine in Spain that has this statue. Can you guys see that okay? I know if the sun is a little hard. That has this statue of Our Lady that was supposedly made by St. Luke. And it was one of the sort of largest sort of pilgrimage sites in Spain. All right, so again, you begin to see a connection, right? And who lives right near the town where this is in Extremadura is Hernan Cortes. Okay, so he's about 30 years younger than Columbus, but he made regular pilgrimages to the Our Lady of Guadalupe. All right, so we begin to see where the thread ties the two of them together. All right, questions? I went through Columbus really fast.
Where's Guadalupe? Is it like a town in Spain?
Yeah, so it is in Extremadura is the name of the town in Spain. So Guadalupe is a Arabic word for like black stone or something. So it's kind of interesting the connection with Arabic, with Our Lady of Guadalupe and then Our Lady of Fatima, right? Where you have Fatima being the first daughter of Muhammad. All right, so we'll sort of move on. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Aztec Empire. So I don't normally do this, but I want to read these like 3 or 4 paragraphs from Warren Carroll's book on it's called Our Lady of Guadalupe and the Conquest of Darkness. Because I want to sort of set, and he does the best job that I can think of, set what was going on in Mexico when Cortes arrives. Right? Many primitive peoples have practiced occasional human sacrifice, and some have practiced cannibalism. None has ever done so on a scale remotely approaching that of the Aztecs. No one will ever know how many they sacrificed, but the law of the empire required 1,000 sacrifices to the Aztec tribal god Huitzilopochtli. We'll just call him the hummingbird wizard because that's what that means, because I can't say that again. In every town with a temple every year, and there were 371 subject towns in the Aztec empire. So it's about 50,000 people a year. All right. Every Aztec city and large town had a central square from which a high pyramidal temple rose, and 4 gates opening upon 4 roads approaching the town in straight lines extending at least 5 miles, each ending at one side of the pyramid temple. Month after month, year after year, in the temple after temple, the sacrificial victims came down the road to the steps, climbed up the steps to the platform to the top, and there they were bent over backwards over large convex slabs of polished stone by a hook around the neck, wielded by a priest with head and arms stained black, never cut black hair caked and matted with dry blood, and once white garments soaked and stained with innumerable gouts of crimson. An immense knife and with a blade of midnight, black volcanic glass, rose and fell, cutting the victim open. His heart was torn out while still beating and held up for all to see, while his ravaged body was kicked over the edge of the temple platform, where it bounced and slithered in obscene contortions down the steps to the bottom, 100 feet below. Later, the limbs of the body were eaten. The early Mexican historian estimated that 1 out of every 5 children in Mexico was sacrificed. If anyone wants to take a shot at that, instead of laughing at me, that's fine. An almost universal symbol in Mexican religion was the serpent. Sacrifices were heralded by the prolonged beating of an immense drum made of skins of huge snakes, which could be heard 2 miles away. Nowhere else in human history has Satan so formalized and institutionalized his worship with so many of his own actual titles and symbols. All right? So Cortes walks in on something that is absolutely demonic. All right? So that's the place we start. Okay, 50,000 people a year are sacrificed. All right. So the Mexican people, long after, saw Cortes as a liberator, right? Because if you were an Aztec, you were in trouble, right? In fact, Aztecs would go to war. That's how they fought their wars, just so they could capture people, right? They wouldn't kill anyone; they'd capture them, right? Because they needed victims for sacrifice. All those towns had to supply people for sacrifices. Women had to supply their children. Okay. Now remember all of this. Horrible, but women supplying their children. Think about that for a second. Think about a mother who watched her son die, who can relate to this, and why she will be so appealing when she appears. Okay. All right. So they were pretty advanced civilization. They had this calendar system, basically 2 calendars that would run sort of parallel to each other, and then they'd meet at a certain point. And they believed that one of the points where these 2 calendars met was going to be the end of the world. So they worshipped the sun, and they thought that this was the 5th sun, and that eventually that sun was going to go away, and that was going to be the end of the world. And in order to stop that from happening, they have to placate the god by giving them human hearts. All right? That's sort of where they're coming from. Okay. All right. So let me think about what else I can tell you about. Yes.
I just think it's so fascinating. Like, I mean, like you talk about the fact that the devil doesn't create on his own, but just twists that which God has. It's just the idea of worshiping the Son and offering up a sacrifice. And I don't know.
Yeah. So so thank you for saying that. So the whole satanic aspect of Satan constantly like aping God. So this sun god killed all of the stars. Okay, and those little gods would then become the sacrifice victims. Okay, so that when the person was sacrificed, the reason why they were cannibals was because they were communing with those gods. Okay, so see how Satan, let's see what he does, right? He's ripping off the Eucharist, right? So they literally thought that by eating the victims, they would become like God, like gods. Okay. So there's all these parallels, right, that can then be flipped. So anyway, so these two calendars flip. They're waiting for this return of a god called Quetzalcoatl. And Quetzalcoatl was going to return at some year one, where the two collide. He was going to come back on the white wings of an eagle, dressed in black. And so on Good Friday in 1519, year one, Hernan Cortes comes with white sails, everyone dressed in black, and they're floored. Okay? Because now they think that their civilization is going to end. Right? And he comes with about 500 soldiers, about 20 cannons, and somehow he's going to take on an empire of what could be like 10 million people. Okay, and the reason is that they have now tied him to Quetzalcoatl. So Montezuma asks him if he is. He's sort of vague about it, but he warns him that if the sacrifices don't stop, he's going to destroy their city. Okay? So he was, unlike Columbus, a good administrator, but once he got going, he was pretty brutal. In fact, once he decided that it was time to fight, he went and sunk all his ships so that none of the people with him could leave. So once he made up his mind, he was going to fight. All right, so let's talk about what Cortes says. He says, "The greater the king we seek, the wider the land, the more numerous the enemy. So much the greater will be our glory. For you have not heard it said, the more Moors, the greater the spoils." All right, so he's has that crusader spirit, right? He's been fighting Muslims, and now he's just moved. Besides, we are obligated to exalt and increase our holy Catholic faith, with which we undertook to do like good Christians, uprooting idolatry, that great blasphemy to our God, abolishing sacrifices, and the eating of human flesh, which are so contrary to nature and so common here. All right. So Cortes decides he's going to take on the entire Aztec Empire. And we sort of, again, know where it ends, where he ends up defeating them. But all along, their leader Montezuma has pretty much a defeatist attitude, because he knows that within 12 years, all the priests have told him that their civilization is coming to an end. In 1531, in the winter solstice. Okay? That's what all the priests have said. All right? So now that he knows that, he sees no point in fighting. All right? So, flash forward a little bit. So, at the heart of their sort of civilization were the temples, right? They were built in the middle of the town. So, Cortes, knowing this, destroys all of the temples. And it leaves the people somewhat distraught, right? Because everything they thought they were doing to save themselves and save the world is now gone, okay? And so once that sort of happens, the people are just sort of defeated, okay? The Spanish sort of come in, and the Spaniards that are there are pretty much making it impossible for the missionaries, okay? Because they have now an advanced civilization, but they don't have things like the wheel, right? Somehow. And so it requires a lot of slave labor. And so they're enslaving these people. Again, this is not Cortes, by the way. This is the people after Cortes is gone. And the king is sort of powerless to do anything about it. Finally, he says enough is enough, and he sends a bishop there. The bishop goes, puts the entire sort of city of Mexico City under interdict, which just means no sacraments, nothing until you stop. And eventually, some of the missionaries are able to sort of reach some of the people. So one of the things that they did a little differently is they would baptize first and then catechize. Okay, and so what would happen is that after they were baptized, the people would continue to go every Saturday and be catechized. Right? And so in 1528, there's a Mexican, and his name is Soaring Eagle. And he takes the baptismal name of John, and John James is his name, Juan Diego. And again, the connection between the Soaring Eagle and Our Lady. And he becomes a Christian and lives just a very simple life. With his wife dies a couple years later, and he lives with his uncle. All right, and that's sort of where we sort of lead up to Our Lady of Guadalupe. Okay. Any questions on Cortes?
So what are we supposed to make of, like, he starts like trying to take over the Aztecs? Is that like a good thing?
Well, what do you think? Like, don't you think that's a good thing? Like, to that level of human sacrifice.
Yeah.
Now, granted, like, what happens afterwards? Not good, right? But again, the motive and understanding, like, I've had this conversation with people before about, like, conquistadors, and pretty much the way to, like, sort of defer people when they're almost shut them up is to ask, well, do you think they're all better off now than they would have been there? Like, how many of your ancestors would have been slaughtered in a temple, right? So yeah, again, I mean, warfare is ugly, and you can't convert by the sword, but you can clear the way for conversion by the sword, right? And sometimes evil has to be faced head on, and that's what happens. Yes, Andrew?
So what did Cortes do after that?
So Cortes then, for a while, he is the administrator in Mexico City. Then he goes off, I think he goes off to Cuba, and then eventually back to Spain. He didn't really, the people, while he was there, he protected the people. Because all along, he made all these allies of the other, like, so we said it was like 500 soldiers, but in truth, what happened was the other tribes started joining with him. So it wasn't just him fighting. So eventually he goes back. Again, like, courageous, a hero, somebody who did the right thing, not always for the right motive, and did some other bad things with it. I mean, he had numerous children with numerous women, but he saw what his mission was, and he set out to do it. Yes, Liz?
You had said they stopped giving up sacraments.
Yeah, so this is like flash forward to like 1529. So because the Spaniards were acting so horribly, the bishop just said, you can't have the sacraments.
Do you think that was practiced in secretive?
You mean like still have like masses in secret, or what? I mean, maybe. I mean, if a bishop says no masses, it's probably no masses, secret or not. This again goes to like, we'll talk a lot more about it, like the sort of separation of church and state kind of thing. But this is like, those people needed to understand that he's like, okay, your souls are in great peril, and so much peril that I'm going to take away the only thing that can save you right now. So it's like, you're drowning, and I'm going to take away the life preserver.
So is part of that the idea of also like just pressure from other people? Like the idea of that working is basically the people pressure the, or is the idea?
Yeah, well, the people who really still want the sacraments are pretty ticked off, right? Like, and they're like, the people who don't care. But then when the people that do care, and they start pressuring the other people, you get this sort of yes.
It's more boat show up because if you sunk his ships, how do you get back?
They built new ships, so he did sink his ships, but he also got everything off of it too. Like he sort of cheated a little bit, but they built more ships. In fact, at one point, they got routed in like a battle or something, and there were like 100 of them left, and he's literally fighting hand to hand, and he's like, "Where's the shipbuilder? Where's the shipbuilder?" Because he's like, "I got to find him right away." And then that's well, no, they take the ship they build a ship and take it right into Mexico City, into the lakes, and then because now again, it's sort of a superstitious culture a little bit, and so these white men coming are throwing fire at us like gods, right? There's cannonballs getting thrown, and they're like, "How is that possible?" And they're they have no idea of like domesticated animals, and they're like, only gods look like can ride whatever that is, a horse, or like they don't even know what they are, right? And they think initially they think like the horse and rider is one thing. And then another reason why the Spaniards rout them is because the Spaniards, they're the way for the Mexicans or the Aztecs to fight is they're always trying to get prisoners, right? The Mexicans are like, dude, whatever, and they're just blowing them away. Like we don't care about prisoners. So, and they'd never fought like that before. So it is a sort of a culture shock in a lot of ways. Yes.
So do you think part of the reason that I guess Cortes and Columbus might be painted with such a brush, or be painted with a brush that paints them off as villains, is because even to culture today, like the idea of going on an evangelization mission is somewhat. Even that itself is like you're trying. Why can't you just let these people believe?
Well, yeah, I mean, especially now, like if you try to evangelize someone, it's almost deemed like you're being violent towards them, right? Like you're not letting them have their own. Like, how dare you impose your values on someone else? Like it's totally like flipped, right? Whereas their attitude is, well, first of all, like Jesus said to do this, so we're going to do it. But it's more of like, and this is a great example of it. Like, how much better off was their culture once they had Jesus? Like that comes down to like, and that's where the faith comes in. Like when you meet someone and you evangelize them, like you have to be convinced that person is better off knowing Jesus. Like ultimately, right? Like, and then there's no fear, nothing. You're like, well, this is just like giving them a glass of water, except much better, right? But and that's their attitude. Like that's the attitude that I think we can easily lose, right? Which is totally different from the attitude of the British and the Dutch when they come to the New World. They have no interest in converting anybody. They just want to worship in private by themselves and get rich. So it becomes and this is why you have to be careful, which we've talked about before, of lumping. Like when people say Christians did this, like own your Catholic identity, right? Like Catholics didn't do that, right? Like Catholics didn't run the Indians out of their land, right? I mean, the obvious of like you see a big difference in most of the people in like Latin America are sort of mixed blood, right? Because the people stayed and integrated with them. That didn't happen in America, right? The idea, like in a Catholic setting, to have something like an Indian reservation would be like very foreign to Catholic understanding. All right. So we're up to Our Lady of Guadalupe. All right. So everything is sort of set for her appearance. Let's talk just for a second, so we're all on the same page about private revelations, just in general. I'm going to throw a little catechesis in here. We all know that public revelation stops at the death of the last apostle, at the death of John the Apostle. But throughout history, there have been apparitions, right? Not just Marian apparitions, but apparitions of our Lord, other saints, and certain ones. The Church, because of the importance of their message, will deem worthy of belief. Okay, you don't have to believe them, the messages at least. But these private revelations, some of them are so convincing, and this is one of them, that we have no reason not to believe them. Okay, and so the church says everything points to these things what happened being genuine. Okay. Once we I forget. I think there's like 40 some odd approved Marian apparitions, right? But Guadalupe is one of the big ones, right? In fact, I think the number of pilgrims last year to the shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe was 20 million. Right? That's as much as St. Peter's and Fatima combined. So it's the most visited shrine in the world. So obviously there's a lot of, and there's just a lot of credibility for this one. But anyway, the way we should look at these is think of them being sort of like heavenly exhortations on how the gospel should be lived at a certain point in history. Okay? So nothing new is added to the gospel, but the way you look at them is, okay, what is Our Lady of Fatima saying to us today? Why did she appear? What's urgent for us to know about the gospel now? All right, so think of it as sort of this divinely appointed, not necessarily inspired, but divinely appointed prophet or prophecy about prophet in the sense of like one who speaks for God, telling you how to apply the gospel to the here and now. Okay, does that make sense, Jessica?
Why could we not call them inspired?
All right, so normally you wouldn't call them inspired because there's no protection in error from error in the visionaries themselves. So this is why they don't say like you have to believe the Fatima message, because the children, like that part of prophecy, that gift of prophecy that goes with sacred scripture, that's gone. That ship has sailed. So the children could have screwed up the message, right? They see these visions, and they're heavenly visions, right, or visions of hell. Like, how do they use human words to describe them, right? They don't have the gift, like the same gift that, say, John the Apostle had when he views heaven in the book of Revelation, where he says exactly what God wants him to say, exactly how he wants to say it. So you wouldn't say they're inspired. What you do say is that because we have feast days, for example, so we talked about this before, about the sort of principle, lex credendi, lex orandi, the law of prayer is the law of belief. So if the church sets up a feast day for something, and people actually continuously celebrate it, well, that's something that's to be believed by the faithful, right? Yes?
So I guess I understand the idea of like local cults, like you say, okay, this person died, people started praying to him, and then that kind of, I find it difficult to believe, like if the church came out and said, let's just say Fatima happened today, 10 years from now, however long, Pope Francis said, okay, we're going to have a feast day for Our Lady of Fatima. I just find it difficult to believe that Catholics would be like, I'm not going to Mass that day because I don't believe in that feast day.
Yeah, so it wouldn't happen like that, though. So what happens is they start locally, and then they expand. And then you'll get a group of bishops go to the Holy See and say, we should expand this universally to the church. So normally, it's not imposed from on high. This is sort of like the sense of the faithful. You'll hear people talk about that. This is where the faithful have responded to something in belief, and the church said, yeah, that's worthy of belief. So like, I think, now this is Rabbi Gnilly talking, I think that we have to believe that Our Lady appeared in Fatima, and we have to believe that Our Lady appeared as Our Lady of Guadalupe, because there are feast days attached to it. The church has accepted those feast days, and they've persisted for a long period of time. But we do not have to believe the messages themselves, even though they're worthy of belief. So in other words, we're not bound to it. All right. So Juan Diego, he's born in 1474. Yes.
But just so if what this message is saying is really only a exhortation on the gospel, I guess the idea would be we're bound to believe it, not because this particular apparition claimed to save, but because it's in the gospel already. It just so happens that this is coming.
Yeah, how it applies, right? Like again, like Our Lady of Fatima is the most recent one, so it's easy to do, right? Like, okay, this clearly is a time for prayer and penance. Like, repent and believe in the gospel. Comes right there, right? So Our Lady's reminding, okay, this part of the gospel really needs to be lived, right? And like when Jesus appears to say Mary Margaret Alacoque, and he gives her the Sacred Heart devotion, right? It's because love has grown cold in France, and they're headed in a bad direction if it doesn't change. And then what happens? Well, it doesn't change, and they head in a really bad direction. Okay, so Juan Diego converts around 1524 with his wife and his uncle. He would arise each Saturday and go to catechism class, walk 9 miles. He's full in, right? Walk 9 miles back and forth. And so on December 9th, 1531, he sets out and he hears this beautiful music coming from this hill. And so he decides he's going to go up over the Tepeyac Hill instead of around the bottom of it. And he gets up there and there's a beautiful woman up there. And he walks up to her, and he knew immediately who it was. Okay, he didn't need to be told who it was. There was no guessing. She looks at him and she goes, "Where are you going, my son?" It's very, matter of factly, very motherly. And he simply just tells her, "Well, I'm going to your house, your son's house, in Mexico City." Okay. And then she says, "I am the ever-perfect Holy Mary, who has the honor to be the mother of the true God by whom we all live, creator of the people, the Lord of the near and far, the Lord of heaven and earth. I want very much that they build my sacred little house here, in which I will show him," Jesus, "I will exalt him upon making him manifest. I will give him to all people in all my personal love, him that is my compassionate gaze, him that is my help, him that is my salvation. Because truly I am your compassionate mother." See, now she's turning it towards Juan Diego, right? "Yours, and that of all the people that live together in this land, and also of all the various lineages of men, those who love me, those who cry to me, those who seek me, and those who trust in me." All right. So she appears, and she immediately makes known that she's the mother of all mankind, right? And it doesn't matter whether they're former Aztecs, none of that, right? And we'll see why that's important in just a second. So she asked him to go to the bishop and have a church built on the site where she is. Okay, and he kind of is not real happy about it because he's a simple man. He's like, "Why would the bishop ever listen to me?" But he goes, and the bishop receives him, but is highly skeptical. Now, this bishop was an extremely holy man. Okay, so the king, Charles V at the time, had appointed him protector of the Indians because he was known for his sanctity. But he also knew that hill used to have a temple on it that was for the mother goddess. And so he's really skeptical when this Indian man comes to him and says, "I had this apparition of a woman who told me that I have to build a church here." Right? He's not necessarily so skeptical about Juan Diego himself, but the fact that the devil's still lurking. Okay, and so he says, "Okay, let me think on what you're saying." And so he sends him away and says, "Well, I'll hear your story another time." All right, and so Juan Diego goes back. And he says to Our Lady, he says, "So I beg you to have one of the nobles who are held in esteem, one who is known, respected, honored, have him carry on, take your venerable breath, your venerable word, so that he will be believed." All right, so he's like, okay, he's never going to believe me, send somebody else. And she turns and says to him, "Listen, my youngest son, know for sure that I have no lack of servants, messengers, to whom I can give the task of carrying my breath, my word, so that they carry out my will. But it's necessary that you do it, that you personally go and plead, that by your intercession my wish, my will, become a reality. And I beg you, my youngest son, and I strictly order you to go again tomorrow to see the bishop, and in my name make him know, make him hear my wish, my will, so that he will bring into being, build my sacred house that I ask of him. And carefully tell him again how I personally, the ever-Virgin Holy Mary, I who am the Mother of God, sent you as my messenger." All right. So he goes, "Yes."
When was this written down?
Not long after. So Juan Diego, I think, is still alive when the account that we have is still written. Again, as we sort of get to the end, you guys know how the story ends, but this is so credible, that no one would not believe it, right? So there's never a moment's doubt in anyone's mind what's happening. So it goes back to the bishop. Bishop asks him more questions, and then says not to come back until he has a sign. And so the bishop had asked for a sign of Our Lady, and he told Juan Diego that he had to come back with the sign. And so at the same time, the bishop tells two of his men to follow him, and they get near the hill, and he just vanishes. Yes, listen.
This is not right, but it says, "Make him hear my wish, my will." So is Mary's will the same will as God the Father?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the definition of a saint, right? Like a saint. That's why we believe saints intercede, right? Because their will is so united to God's will that their will is God's will, and God's will is their will. That's a good question. All right. So he goes back and tells Our Lady that he needs the sign, and she told him. She said, "Okay, come back tomorrow, and I will give you the sign." So tomorrow comes, but he finds out that his uncle is deathly ill, and he needs to find a priest for his uncle. And so he tries to run away from the hill. Right? So he's like, I can't go that way. I'm going to go a different way. And so he goes the other way, and in the account, it has her running down the hill to him, after him. And then she says to him, "My youngest son, what's going on? Where are you going? Where are you headed? Afterwards, I will return here again to carry out your venerable word." This is Juan Diego. "Lady, my little girl, forgive me, be patient with me a little longer, because I am not deceiving you with this. Tomorrow, without fail, I will come in all haste." So he's like, I can't do this today. I've got to go take care of what's going on with my uncle. And she says to him, "Listen, put it into your heart, my youngest son, that what frightened you, what afflicted you is nothing. Do not let it disturb your face, your heart. Do not fear this sickness nor any other sickness, nor any sharp or hurtful thing. Am I not here, I who have the honor to be your mother? Are you not in my shadow and under my protection? Am I not the source of your joy? Are you not in the hollow of my mantle and the crossing of my arms? Do you need anything more besides that?" So Our Lady tells him basically, why didn't you come to me? I can do anything you need. Your uncle's sickness is nothing. And so she tells him, "Go up over the hill and gather the sign and bring it back to me." She's like, "There's flowers." So he goes and he gets up on top of the hill, and it's December, frost-covered ground, rocky soil, and there's all these Castilian roses. And so he gathers them up in his tilma, and he brings them back. And she has him open the tilma, and she arranges them. It's like a beautiful little thing, like a mother, right? Like a mother arranging flowers for, or getting their kids dressed for church or something. She's putting them perfectly, right? And so he now has a sign. So he closes the tilma up over the flowers. She orders him not to show them to anybody but the bishop. And so he goes and he tries to get the audience with the bishop. The two men who had followed him are, a little suspicious of him at this point. Like, "What are you carrying?" And he won't show them. And they eventually open the tilma, and there's just flowers on the tilma. And then he folds it back up. Right? So she took the flowers away. Then he finally gets into the bishop, and he says, "I have the sign you asked for." And he opens the tilma, and the roses fall out, and on his tilma is the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Right. And you can sort of imagine initially, he may not even realize it, right? It's there all of a sudden. So I want to talk a little bit about obviously about the tilma itself. But let me just talk about one thing very quickly about his uncle. So his uncle was obviously healed, but it's to him that she appears and actually gives her name. Right? And she does that because he's an elder in the community. Everyone knows he's dying, and so they witness this miracle, and then he preaches. Right? Then he tells them what happened. And he tells them the name of the one who healed him. All right. And so that the perfect Virgin, Holy Mary of Guadalupe. That's how she introduces herself. All right, so let's talk about the Toma. How many of you guys know a lot about the Toma? Oh, dude, this is a really cool. This is awesome, by the way. I'm gonna try not to get too excited. All right, so a tilma is basically made of forget what the it's like cactus, some kind of cactus fibers, right? They make them with these cactus fibers. They last maybe 8, 10, 12 years at the most. All right, so that's where we start the material. All right, so maybe he yes.
So this was like a garment he was wearing?
Yeah, it's just like an outer garment.
Oh, okay, so he already had it with him, and then she said, "Go pick up the roses with the."
Yeah. So he packs them in the.
Okay.
They would carry things in their tilma often.
So it didn't just appear on top of the hill.
No,
he had it with.
Yeah, he was wearing it.
Is it like a coat? Is it like a poncho? Like, what's it?
Yeah, I mean, you can think of it as a poncho. I mean, it's more or less. So the tilma was a very the way they wore them, like depending on your social caste, you would wear it differently. So him being part of the lowest social caste, his tilma is sort of all the way down. So you tie it up if you were certain. I don't remember all the different variations, but yeah, everyone sort of had one. All right. Okay, so we have this thing. Maybe 15 to 20 years of the material, right? It's going to last, and it's lasted 490 years. All right, so that's our first thing. All right. Second thing, for 200 or 300 years, it was kept in a chapel where there was constant incense, saltpeter in the air, smoke from candles, nothing. All right.
Incense.
Huh?
Incense.
What did I say?
Incense.
Did I really?
Yeah.
Incense.
Incense. All right. I was wondering why I was looking at me like incense. I'm like, okay.
It's good to debunk Freud by now.
Yeah.
We don't use incense in this parish.
Yeah. So the tilma itself, if you were to put a thermometer on it, would be 98.6 degrees always. All right. So that's the constant temperature of it. So we have already talked about the attempt to blow it up. All right, let's sort of get into it a little bit. I could just keep going on, but I want to unpack some of the really cool things.
Oh yes,
I was going to ask about that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the coolest thing is sort of something they discovered recently. All right, so in the 1940s, there was an ophthalmologist looking at the Our Lady's eyes, and he thought he could kind of see like a person in it, but he didn't really have the ability to sort of get closer. So now that we have sort of the technology in her irises, in the exact way that so there's 3 images. I don't know if you guys know about how things sort of go in your eye. I don't know that whole much about it, but essentially you have 3 images of something in both eyes when you see something, and one is inverted. I forget what that's called. But anyway, so when they look at it, like under a microscope, sort of blown up, they can see 3 images in the eye. Right. There was a Japanese ophthalmologist who looked at the eyes and fainted. And they asked him, well, why did you faint? And he said, well, because the pupils responded to light. So he shined a light into the eyes, and the pupils responded. And that's been like every time somebody looks at the eyes look human. Like they respond how human eyes respond. Yes?
So when people are going to examine the tilma, are they just like on a ladder looking?
Yeah, they would take it, put it somewhere, and let people, like they would do that in like a private room or something. Yeah, I mean they wouldn't look at it behind the glass. Oh, so you mean like just when you visit?
No, like when.
Yeah, when they're inspecting it. Yeah. Yeah. The church very much like the church wants people to actually look at this and try to debunk it, because you don't want people to have a belief in a false thing, right? but I think we're way past that now. Like for instance, like when they look at it artistically, like when you draw something, right? When you're going to paint it, you draw it first, and then there's no drawing on it. It's just on there. There's no paint on it. It's just on there. Anyway, so back to the eyes. So reflected in the eyes is everyone in the room when he opened the Talmud. Okay, so they knew that there was like 6 people in the room, but it ends up that there's 12 because there's a family in the room as well. But one of them is the bishop, and you can tell because he's dressed like a bishop. So some of these things, so the whole height of the thing, it's about 6 feet tall, the whole thing. And Our Lady is about maybe 56 inches or something. The eye is like 5/16 of an inch. Right, so many magnifications get at that. Right, no human hand could paint that. Right, not possible. So the sort of the digital technology to sort of drill down reveals this, which is really kind of cool. All right, let's talk a little bit about.
So you think that's 12 people?
Yeah, there's 12 people in there. I mean, this is not a good. There are. I mean, if you Google it, you can see like better pictures than I can show you here. I think those are actually might even be drawn in there. I don't know. But I do know. I think the bishop has his mitre on in the image and everything. All right, so let's look at the Talmud itself. So a couple things just about the rays of the sunlight. First of all, you guys remember the heavenly music that was being played? So a priest in the 90s got this idea. If I flip it on its side, those look like musical bars. And he plays the music, and he actually plays out the music, and it's beautiful. You can, again, YouTube it, Google it, and it's perfect. Like, perfect pitch, perfect harmony, everything. You have to sort of look, I don't have an image of it, but you just have to trust me that the way the sunlight is they're musical bars. And listen to the music. It's pretty.
Where are the musical bars?
The rays of the sunlight shooting out.
There's like bigger ones.
Yeah, are musical bars. So the image itself, obviously, almost 500 years later, hasn't faded very much. But the stars and the moon and the sun have faded, ever so slightly. Because heaven and earth pass away. Okay. But Our Lady has not. Nothing about Our Lady has faded. All right. The stars, now I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit. So the stars are the exact formation of the stars at 6:30 a.m. on December 12, 1531.
What stars?
All the stars on her mantle. They're perfectly laid out, 100%. But the only thing that's really kind of cool about it is it's not. It's from the perspective of the sun instead of the perspective of the earth. So it's from heaven looking down. Okay?
What constellation are just kind of like?
Yeah. Again, these like I'm mostly trying to sort of stir your like individual study. I don't know like all the constellations, like how they're ordered, but it's if someone has overlaid a map on top of them, and you can see all of them. And what's kind of cool is some of the like certain constellations have like astronomical meanings, like Virgo is in a certain place, and like all of it has meaning to it. Every piece of this has meaning. All right, so
is that an angel on the bottom, or
yes,
Here's the Verules.
yeah. It's a very, but here's the point, right? So there's all these cool things we're seeing, right? And then, but the message is the painting itself, and the message is what they understood. All right. So she picked images from their culture and used them, right? And so that's what I want to talk a little bit about, right? So first we got the clouds on the outside. So the Virgin is surrounded by the clouds, and the people would have looked at that and known that she was from heaven, right? Remember we talked about how Montezuma saw Cortes coming among the clouds, right? So anything coming among the clouds was from heaven, right? Then you have the sun. So if you look, there's like two suns behind her. You can't necessarily see it on this image. There's they're golden rays sort of shooting out behind her, and it shows that she's like the mother of light. And that second sun, remember I talked about the 5 suns? Like if she's eclipsing it, right? It's her eclipsing the sun. Right? So every time they got an eclipse, they would freak out. They thought the world was. And here she is eclipsing the sun. Their second sun, okay? Then she's also wearing a cross around her neck, which is the same cross that the Franciscan missionaries wore. So she's now associated with them. Her hands are in the sort of the shape of a prayer, and so she's not a god. She's praying to a god. Okay? And the same thing with her knees. She's almost her knees are bent like she's dancing, because when they prayed they would dance. All right. The mantle and the tunic. So the flowery tunic symbolizes the earth, and the turquoise was the color that only royalty wore. Right, so she's a queen. And then
you can see your mouth.
yeah, I don't know why it's back up on the screen, but I can't see it. It's weird. All right, where is that? Oh, so the moon. She's standing on the moon, and I really need my mouse.
So the mouse is on.
It's on the projector.
Really entertaining.
Yeah, how do I get it off the projector, though?
You move it to like the top or the bottom, left or right of the screen. Probably like the right side or the left side.
One of those two.
It's really that direction.
Does it not move forward when it's not?
Oh, good. Yeah, that works.
Imagine your screen's like connected to it, but your gate to get across may only be like part of the side.
I don't think I'm going to ever examine a Toma. Like, I don't think I'm scientifically... If I can't even operate a computer, there is no way I'm going to get anywhere near it.
What do you do with statistics?
I know, really. Where's my abacus? All right, so... like, I got it back. Here we go. All right, so where are we at? So we're at the moon. So she's standing on a crescent moon, which is the god of fertility. Again, standing on top of it. So then we have the black ribbon around her waist, which is a maternity band. This is the only sort of apparition in which she appears pregnant. All right. In the Mexican culture, when a woman was pregnant, she would tie a ribbon around her waist. That's how we know she's pregnant.
Do we take do we get that meaning to mean like pregnant with Christ, or like Revelation pregnant with the church?
No, they would be pregnant with Christ.
Okay.
Yes.
I also heard like a fetal heartbeat.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I don't know if that's something constant. So like some of the things are constant, like the checking of the eyes. Like whoever looks at the eyes, they're human eyes looking back at them. But I've heard that too. What were you going to ask him?
So this is just a general kind of, I guess, apparition question. So can Our Lady and Christ just appear kind of whenever? Because you hear the like infant Jesus appears, or so something like that. Like, is that just? Are they just? I guess they're just able to do that. They're just able to change kind of where they are in their life. Because it's not like she's not actually pregnant right now.
Well, so you like look at her. Look at her face, right? Like she and again, not the, like this is the original image, so I try to do that. But if you're obviously seeing it, it'll be different. But she is not a mestizo Indian, like, but she is here, right? Which is again one of those things where it's where this is also for the Spaniards that are there, right? Because she didn't appear as an Indian, she appeared as a mestiza, right? Which is different, right? So she's showing like how she, not only how she and her son unite heaven and earth, but how she is going to unite, the Spaniards and the Mexicans.
I think it makes sense too because she's mother of all men. So in different apparitions, she looks like.
Yeah, I mean, she always looks like if you go to like the Basilica in D.C. and you go in all the chapels, like, and a lot of them have her apparitions. She looks like the people there, right? Because she's their mother, and that makes perfect sense. Yes, Alice.
I also heard that her hands folded was a sign of virginity.
Yes, and then yes. So, is it her hands? Yeah, I think it is her hands folded are a sign, also a sign of virginity. There is a sign of her virginity on here, though, that they would have, and I think it is her hands folded. So the flowers themselves are not just random; those are actually glyphs. So they're actually language, like they're written words. And I don't recall like what all the words are, but there's messages even in the glyphs, right? And you can actually lay. Someone has done this too, where they've laid it again sideways on top of a map of Mexico, and each one of the big glyphs sits upon a volcano in Mexico.
What is that supposed to be?
I don't know. I mean, that's why some of it is like you don't know like what it means, right?
Secret volcano.
I'm really annoyed by this mouse, by the way.
Oh, you went backwards.
Magic.
You had to do the whole thing
Use
again.
the arrow keys.
Yeah.
Use the arrow keys.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. I don't know why it's. All right, so what I want to do is, because we're at 6 o'clock, so what I want to do is talk a little bit about like what's the message for us today. Okay, like what does it have to do with now? Here's what. Here's what one of the sort of early missionaries said. He said, "The Indians, submerged in profound darkness, still loved and served false little gods, clay figurines, and images of our enemy the devil, in spite of having heard about the faith. But when they heard that the Holy Mother of our Lord Jesus Christ had appeared, and since they saw and admired her most perfect image, which has no human art, their eyes were opened as if suddenly day had dawned on them." So, in the course of 6 years, there were 9 million converts. That's like 3,100 a day. That's like drive-through baptism, right? Like it's literally like, that's a lot, right? Because it spoke directly to them, right? And it gave them hope, right? Like they thought the world was going to end, and that their world was ending, right? Now they had Christ. Yes.
Was there any connection to the winter solstice in when she appeared?
Oh yeah, she appears at the winter solstice. Yeah.
So the day they thought the world was going to end?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. Like exactly a day. Like so again, it's like the divine judo of using like Satan's little ploy and turning it around upon himself. So I think there's a couple of John Paul II calls Our Lady the star of Guadalupe the star of the new evangelization. And this is the part about it not being done yet, right? Because we should look at her as a way to evangelize. So first, the obvious thing is like the culture of the image, right? We used to be a culture of the word, now we're a culture of the image. And so the power of an image, the power of things like movies, paintings, art, all those things to actually preach the gospel. Something that, as we talked about before, that Christians have sort of just dropped and abdicated, all right? And something we need to take back. So how it spread, like how devotion to the image spread, was just word to like person to person. So it wasn't the missionaries; they were failing. It was just person to person, friendship, right? Like, have you seen the image? No. Let me take you to it. Like, hey, I think I found the Messiah. Have you seen it? You want to come? Come and see. right? Like that approach to evangelization of just person to person, friend to friend. All right. Let's talk a little bit more about. I have no idea why that's happening, by the way. So this is where John Paul II calls her the star of the new evangelization. In America, the mestiza face of the Virgin of Guadalupe was from the start a symbol of the inculturation of the gospel, of which she has been the lodestar and the guide. Through her powerful intercession, the gospel will penetrate the hearts of the men and women of America and permeate their cultures, transforming them from within. All right, so John Paul II thinks that Our Lady, especially Our Lady of Guadalupe, is going, through her intercession, the gospel is going to penetrate the hearts of men and women of America and permeate their cultures, transforming them from within. She's the star of the new evangelization. Yes, Connor.
So when I've heard the idea of the new evangelization, most of the time I hear, what I've heard it means is kind of referring to this new group of people that arises that have lived in a society that has been exposed to Christ, knows the idea, knows the gospel stories, knows kind of the general idea supposedly of Christianity, and yet it's not a Christian culture. It's not a group of people that are actually following Christ. It's just that they've had exposure to it. Is that a correct understanding? And if so, how is that?
Yeah, so the new evangelization is it's kind of a confusing term, honestly, because all that's new about it is method and ardor. So it's not aimed at anyone in particular, although we do need to aim for the sort of the sacramentalized but not catechized kind of people, like that maybe were baptized, fell away from the church, maybe come every so often, but it's really like, in essence, it's really about like truly discipling people, right? Like actually getting disciples and teaching them, right? And teaching them about Christ, and it has to be sort of person to person, and that's the methodology of the sort of the new evangelization. John Paul II, I think it's in his letter for the new millennium, talks a lot about, like, he says, okay, well, the first thing that has to happen is that parishes have to become schools of prayer. Like, so people have to first learn how to pray in order to, and that was one of the gifts that Our Lady of Guadalupe gave to the people of Mexico, right? Like, she gave them a church, like, and she gave them an icon that they could study and pray. Like, they could look at that and learn about Christ and actually engage with Christ. So that's why she's very adamant about building a church, right? So it's a lot of it is that it's like, you know all about Christianity, but like it's introducing them to the person of Christ, because that's what's lacking, right? That's ultimately what's lacking. All right, so let's talk a little bit about. So he used the word enculturation. Let's talk a little bit about that for a second. What is culture?
Something to do with that creative.
Sometimes. Like, so we talk about, like, we got to, that culture is toxic. We've got to evangelize the culture. What is culture? Like,
I would define it as... Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting. I had a class I took in to say this kind of on it, but I think one of the things, like, it's not necessarily... One idea was it's not necessarily something everybody does, because we tend to think, like, these people did this, but it's something everybody would be aware of. Like, the Super Bowl, you probably at least know that it exists and be like, yeah, that's a thing here, even if you don't care about it.
Okay, so that's an element of culture, but what is culture itself? I want us to begin to think about this for just a second, because, like, what happened was the Aztec culture was decimated. Why was it okay to decimate the Aztec culture?
It was bad.
Okay. Why was it bad?
So I'm thinking, like, I would just, the way I see culture and think about it would be a society's pursuit of the beautiful. And so if what they're pursuing is not actually beauty or that is bad.
Go ahead.
I doubt this is complete, but I would say it's a shared ideals or perceptions of a group of people.
Okay. How about the soil in which we grow? We'll use agriculture. The soil in which we grow. Well, okay, so too much metaphor? Like,
You
so,
can mean a lot of things by that.
yes. Well, no, I mean, it is like the purpose, right, of culture, like a Christian culture is one in which somebody grows up to be Christian, right? So it is the soil in which man's nature is fulfilled, ideally, right? So it says something about, like, what's wrong with our culture?
It's not serving Christ.
It says something about man that isn't true, right? Ultimately,
Yeah.
right? And so it can never be good. Like when it says something about man that's not true, the culture can never be good. Now, is the whole culture like that? No, and that's where enculturation comes in. So you have to identify elements of the culture that actually are good for men and women, that actually lead to their thriving, lead to them being virtuous, lead to their holiness. Yes.
Now, this might be a perhaps thing we can handle later on or as part of the discussion, but I would like your comments upon, since we're talking about enculturation and what we can find in a certain culture and take a good, and I would like...
I hate when you're grinning when you ask a question.
You can comment
You
on
throw me under the bus.
Synod, and how some of the questions, like, okay, how we evangelize.
Yeah, so I will not comment broadly, but if you ask a specific question, I'll comment at the end.
Okay.
On what?
The Amazon Synod.
Um,
The Pan-Amazonian Synod.
okay.
Oh,
Yeah, so we will. I will definitely come back to that. As long as you ask a specific question and not my general view of it.
Yeah.
Can I ask a specific question about your
Yes.
general views?
Yes. All right. So we good on the definition of culture. All right. So enculturation then is to Liz.
So is that why there's like the argument of like following more traditional Catholic traditions versus like culture Catholic?
Yeah. So when
Because it's like this false reality of like what good is.
Yeah, so when there's elements in the culture that can be either redeemed or elevated, then you redeem or elevate them. But if there's elements that can't be, they have to be replaced, right? And so when there's things that are bad enough, that's when like the classical, like hard sort of the elements of like really orthodox Catholicism slide in, right? Because they're like, okay, we got to start like all over again, right? This is like what's behind like the Benedict option, where people are like, okay, we've got to go off in these little sort of small groups and sort of form our cultures here, and then we can slide out, right? And whether that's the best way to do it or not, I don't know. But the point is that we have to identify, like, first of all, what's good for us. Like, and that is, if it's good for us, then it's objective, right? So I can actually sit and say that the Aztec culture, like, was bad. There's no room for like cultural relativism. Like, there's nothing about that part that was okay. And so the problem is when to Connor's question is when you try to use enculturation when you believe in cultural relativism, like that all cultures are equal. That
culture is a good in and of itself, which is a very popular one today.
Yeah, I mean, culture is not a good. Culture is a means to an end, and you know, like all soils can have a lot of crap in it too. Like, I mean, it's just the reality.
I don't know if everyone else's like history, social studies was like this for me, but I remember all of this being presented as like culture is the good thing, and anyone trying to change culture ended up being the bad guy. I don't know when that started, but that was like at least what it's like.
All right, so let me give you the church's definition. So this is from the Second Vatican Council. The word culture, in its general sense, indicates everything whereby man develops and perfects his many bodily and spiritual qualities. Right, so culture is that which leads to our perfection, the sort of sum of social conditions, the soil in which we grow, which Casey doesn't like to be hung up on the soil.
What makes that unique from any other like word? Because like I feel like society in its general sense indicates everything like we're man like. Yeah,
well, it's a word that people use, right? That like we struggle for a definition because everyone says it. So I think what the church is trying to do is, we have other words that could be used for that. but is trying to say, okay, this is what it should be. So if we look at culture, I think it's different from society in the sense that culture is like the things that go on within society, like whether they lead to authentic human development or not, would be, that would be how you would decide, right?
And the word perfects, is this talking about an ideal culture, or is this using perfects in a sense of saying it perfects in that it moves you towards something? Now, whether that's something that's actually perfect,
yeah, I don't know that it's there's the sort of ambiguity that happens a lot with definitions from certain periods of time in the church. I think it's a little bit ambiguous as to whether it perfects in the sense of it makes you perfect in man himself, or perfect in the sense of like it has a goal and it wants you to fulfill it. Yes, Keegan.
When you say that there is an ideal culture, or just that there are objectively wrong?
So is there an ideal culture? So there's obviously Christian culture, like with Christ as the king and the head, but the elements from there on, are invariable. Like they could be whatever. So I don't know that there's like a single perfect culture. Some are just better than others.
But we can say there's some definitely bad ones.
Yeah, and some are better than others, and like the perfect one probably isn't going to come along because there'll always be sort of elements of fallen human nature in it.
And sometimes we can comment on bad things, like we can say these are really bad, but then we could also say these two good ones. This one, like we could theoretically, objectively.
Yeah, as bad as the Aztec culture was, Our Lady found elements by which, like, they could relate to the truth, right? Because everybody's looking for the truth, right? Like, it's as soon as they hear it, the word has power all its own. You can say it, and people are moved by it. So that's why it's a model, because she took all of the things and turned them. Some had to be thrown out, but that was okay.